Hello and welcome to this online lecture about photocomics. My name is Gyöngyi Pál.
And my name is Maria Pecsics.
We will guide you through our main topic and get really deep in order to inspire your work. In this lecture, we will present a short introduction to what is a photocomic, where does it come from, what made this particular form appear. We will focus on one hand on popular love stories in photonovels and photocomics, and on the use of this form as an artistic expression. We will study international cases and Hungarian examples to give the special context in which these works appeared in Eastern Europe. So let's see some definitions. What is considered to be a comic? What is a comic? And what is a photocomic? Actually, everybody knows what a comic is. We have an intrinsic knowledge about it, and most of the people, they think that the text bubbles, that's the most important sign of a comic, although the text can appear in many forms. In the book Understanding Comics, that in reality is a comic theory book written in comic book form, Scott McCloud describes comics as a visual means of expression that uses at least two sequential images. It is difficult to define the genre, as postmodern artists have consciously worked to deconstruct the characteristics that define the genre. From the perspective of McCloud's definition, some caricature from the middle of the 19th century could also be defined as comics. Scott McCloud studies the transition of sequences within comics that could be applied to photocomics too. He gives the following categories. The first one would be the moment-to-moment transition, when two images shows the duration of time, like a film movie cut into moments. In McCloud's example, a woman with open, then closed eyes. The second is the action-to-action category. Here, you could argue that it is also a moment-to-moment transition, because the throwing of the ball is followed in time by the baseball player hitting the ball, but what really counts here is the action and its consequence. The third category focuses on the subject-to-subject, while the fourth category, a scene-to-scene transition. In this one, the time passing can be longer between the two images, 10 years in McCloud's example. The fifth is the aspect-to-aspect transition, and the last, when the two images follows each other without any explicit logical connection. We enumerated these categories because they are also used in photocomics, and some avant-garde artists were experimenting with these structures of sequences, how they convey meaning. The work that is usually cited as a predecessor of the photocomics is the first published photojournalistic reportage which Nadar made in 1886 with the chemist Michel Eugène Chevreul on the occasion of the scientist's 100th birthday. The alignment of frames and text is similar to the layout of photocomics and would pass into the minimal definition of Scott McCloud. Although not everybody agrees on that, but this panel that you can see right in front of you is mostly described as the first photocomic strip, although it does not have any text. This piece, entitled Les Tribulations de Monsieur Vise, or in English, The Adventures of Monsieur Vise, was made in 1929 by Man Ray, Max Morris, and Marcel Duhamel. And it was published in the back of the tourist magazine Voyage en France and tells a surrealistic story about this little wire figure that you can see that is walking around the city and doing nonsense things. We can think of Duchamp's Fontaine or other ready-mades that have been published and that have probably inspired the creation of this visual joke. Photography and comic strips, as genre, are in many ways related. They both have long been depreciated because of their popular use. The rise of both have contributed to the rise of image culture, and it has accustomed people to fragmentary narratives. As an artistic means of expression, both have gained institutional recognition in the 1980s, but as art, they still reach only a small minority today. So, traditionally, photocomics were associated to the genre of film novels. And these film novels, they appeared in the 1910s, according to some theologians like Jean Battens. Others mentions the date of 1930. This is different from source to source. The first Hungarian examples that we can found and that we have found in our study are from the 1960s. These film novels, actually, they are reconstituting the film and the movies, and they appeared with the spread of cinema. They had two main goals. One of the goals was to serve as a visual memory of the film. The viewers could take home with them the film like this, and it helps them to recall their favorite scenery of the film, or they could admire the actors of the film, of the movie. On the other hand, these were also visual summaries that functioned as movie trailers for those who haven't seen the film yet. These film novels take also various forms. We can find one-page versions. As I said before, in Hungary, these film novels, they appeared way later than in Italy or in France. So they appeared in the 1960s. They were mostly published in weekly or monthly magazines. But what is common to all these magazines and all the film novels in these magazines that they don't use any bubbles. They don't use text bubbles. They only use these captions under the image. And mostly they are made from film stills and not work photos. But you can see that they have something interesting if you see the title and how they play with the different typography of the title. There are versions where the story is presented as series, just like film series. Here you had to wait a week to read how it continues, how the story goes on. And in one magazine you could find only one page at a time. In this example, Csárdás királynő, what is interesting is that we can find also dialogues that are transcripted, but not in bubbles, just next to the text. And we can find also storyboard-like instructions, such as, for example, in a part it says, in the background, melody can be heard. And of course, each part ends with the mention to be continued. So we were pushed to be to wait for the next issue. In 2018, we organized an exhibition on photo novels and photo comics. And there, next to the exhibition, we had a talk with János Vető and Bereményi Géza, two Hungarian artists whose photo novel we will study later, and we will present to you. But in this talk, János Vető was telling his idea about where does this particular photonovel or photocomic form comes from. And he says, or according to him, the editors of the magazines were the real inventors of the form of the photocomics, as they were experimenting with sequencing images into interesting forms, or how they associated image frame by frame narratives. And you can see two examples taken out from the Young Stars magazine, ifjúsági magazine, which experience with the same kind of interesting sequential form. But to get back to our main subject, the photocomics, actually, parallel to the emergence of film novels, appeared the genre of photonovels or photocomics. Both terms are used in English, as well as the form or the term of fumetti that comes from Italian, and it means literally little cloud, and it refers to the text bubbles. But we've seen also forms where the text doesn't appear in text bubbles and it's still named as fumetti. You might be familiar with this love story type of photonovels, or I guess you have already seen such magazines, at least once in a lifetime. But you may not know that the invention of the photonovel as genre is attributed to the Italian screenwriter Stefano Reda, who launched the photonovel magazine Il mio sogno, which means literally my dream in Italian, and it was launched in 1947. At the beginning, they didn't know how to call this new form, so they used the description that you can see as well, settimanale di romanzi d'amore a fotogrammi, which means literally weekly love stories in photograms. What to know for the history of the genre is that Bolero film released 2 weeks later Il mio sogno, so 2 days after this, another magazine called Bolero film, and this was the one who used first the term photoromanzi, so photonovel. Both both magazines are contesting each other's right of primacy on inventing the genre. The book Photoroman, written by Jean Battens and Clémentine Melois, indicates the screenwriter Cesare Zavattini as the inventor of the genre, but adding that nothing is proven, like much else about the history of the genre, because of the lack of archives and the lack of scientific interest at that time for such a low cultural product. We don't know for sure who was the first to invent this genre, but what we know for sure, that after the success of these 2 journals, many photonovels started to be published in weekly, fortnightly, or monthly form, and in several countries they gained a similar popularity to the Italians. In France, for example, the weekly Nous deux, with 2 in French, it sold in 1.5 million copies per week at the height of its popularity. But in Argentina, at its peak, actually 70 million copies were sold a month. So far we talked about film novels and photonovels, but it might be for now confusing what is the difference between the 2. Photonovels are usually associated with film novels not only because of their foremost similarity, but because they explore the same idealized world as Hollywood films. They employ a similar film crew using scene sets, light, costumes, etc. The narratives are also full of stereotypes and cliches, love stories with similar narratives, but changing background information. So the difference between film novels and photonovels would only be that film novels derives from a film and photonovels are particularly made to come out in a journal. These photographs combined with text bring to life the world of soap operas. There is always a love story and some dramatic event that the lovers have to deal with, and in the end, of course, good always wins. It was so coded that in 1956 they published a little booklet on how to make a photonovel. The catalogue of the exhibition Photonovel had held in Marseille in April 2018 lists the following topos that must come back from in each photonovel. For example, love, passion, seduction, attraction, sensuality, dolce vita, relationship, jealousy, betrayal, breakup, destiny, drama, betrayal, violence, and blessing. So they were really, really coded. Photonovels not only derive from film novels, but also from drawn novels or love story versions. The post-war years saw the development of sentimental women's press, also known as the press of the heart. These magazines featured short stories, narratives, graphic novels about love and sentimental feelings. According to Jan Battens, the genre's popularity in post-World War II Italy was fueled by the yearning for love and better life. In Italy, at that time, acting in a photonovel was almost a compulsory step before becoming a film actor or a movie star, just as today would be acting in a B category movie or in a film series is actually a step before becoming a recognized movie star. Sophie Loren, called Lorenza, is one of the most famous examples who started her career as a photonovel actor. Although it's not her that you can see here, but she starred in a lot of photonovel as well. In Hungary, due to political reasons, the photonovel genre appeared way later in the 1960s. But it had never reached a so big popularity to have dedicated journals with only photonovels in it, like in Italy or in France. The earliest photonovel that we have found was published in a woman's magazine in 1963. The title is literally, if we translate it, it's a woman's magazine. The main protagonist here, what you can find, is a woman working in a chemistry lab, but the whole story is written by a woman and photographed by a woman, and so the whole piece is an underlining promotion for the emancipation of women. The other particularity of that this piece is that one of the seducers is a photographer, and this photographer is described and presented as an unreliable person. But we can find also other interesting specimens in these Hungarian photonovels, like the one that you can see here, The Beekeeper Story, that is a love story in the rural settings
published in the weekly newspaper of the Patriotic People's Front called Képes Újság, Image Magazine in Hungarian. The beekeeper story ran as a one-row strip at the bottom of a pair of pages of the newspaper. The story is told in 18 issues. Here the main protagonist is Jolán, the wife of an old beekeeper, which is called John. The narrative is very, very basic. The wife is seduced by another beekeeper, Rudi, and fortunately for the readers, it's summer and it is often hot, so Jolán takes off her clothes several times during the story to take a dip in a pond. From more than 50 years of a distance, it seems odd to see sequences where a picture of cows is followed by an undressing woman. As photonovel's popularity in post-World War II was fueled by the yearning for love and better life, the same yearning is thematized in the photonovels that suddenly became popular in Hungary during the regime change in the late 80s. Házibuli, what you can see here, is meaning literally the party in Hungarian, and it takes its title from the French teen romantic comedy La Boum that was an international box office success, and not only in Western Europe but in Hungary as well. The photonovel Házibuli that you can see was a long love story published in 4 issues of the magazine, entitled Youth Magazine. It took several pages long in each issue, and it was about the desire for freedom and belonging to the West in a form that is easy to identify with again. And it is a fascinating mix of sexuality, parental expectation, also Fidesz propaganda, condom advertising, and the sequel based on Ruido's writing. After the regime change in 1949, the whole publishing scenery has changed, so most of these magazines have disappeared. What we can find in the field of photonovel is a German photonovel translated into Hungarian. It was called Bravo, and it was the largest teen magazine within the German language sphere. The first issue was published in Hungary in the 1980s, and Bravo, as thematics or topics, were covering primarily what youth or young people were interested in. So almost in every issue you had information on pop and movie stars, and as well as something very novelty as well about relationship and sex advices. So far we've seen a lot of popular love story examples, film novel examples that are interesting cultural, visual representation types in themselves, but what interests us is the genre as an artistic expression. In 1966, Joe Mitchell began assembling photographs in sequences to create stories. He does not refer to photonovels, neither calling them as such, but they certainly influence these popular examples certainly influence the artistic photonovels and photonovel creations. In 1974, Mitchell began adding his handwriting to the photographs. He even claims a literary position. He says, I quote, "Most photographers are reporters. I am a writer of photography." End of quote. The title of his book, True Dreams, refers to the tension between the veracity of the photographic image and the dreamlike, symbolically charged world that characterizes his photographic universe. In Things Are Queer, the sequences present a traveling or zooming backwards. In the first picture, we see a bathroom, and then, in the next image, it seems like a giant leg is standing next to the wash basin. And then, we see a person in a real size, and all the bathroom equipment looks like it would have shrunk into child size. And then, on the next picture, we see the same image appearing in a book as an illustration. Then we zoom out from the picture and see a man holding the book in his hand. And then we see the same man in a tunnel, and then we see that this is actually a picture on the wall that appears to be the picture that was seen in the first picture of the bathroom. Michels doesn't call his work photonovels, but we can find other creations that do so, like the one you can see in the picture. Most photonovels are a collection of cliched stories, stereotypes, as we saw, the popular ones, but we have exceptions as well, with exciting arrangements, image cuts, text-image combinations that were influenced by the Italian neorealist film or the French New Wave film imagery. Jack Monnery, Frank Venay, Nous Deux, that you can see here, a page of it, was published in 1973, and it's a photographic road movie between two women who fall in love from 1971 to 1972. The whole book has blue-tainted pictures that make it very special, and it emphasizes the fictive and oniric part of the story. The panels are presented in a very innovative way. The text is never put into the pictures in bubbles, but it is on one side in a black frame, as it would be a picture itself. In the 1980s, several books appeared entitled with the, quote, new photonovels, which were expressively, their goal was to elevate the genre of the photonovel to an artistic status. They were mostly published by Minuit, a publishing house that promoted also the new novel, Nouveau Roman, and it was part of the New Wave cinema as well. The authors consciously innovated the genre, deconstructing its fixed code. So the medium changed from magazine to book, which gave a greater freedom to shape the story. And the succession of photographs, the size and the position of the image were really made as comics are made as well. And the size and the position of the image matters for the interpretation of the image and the text. An outstanding example of these so-called new photonovels is the one that you can see here, called Droit de Regard by Benoît Peters and Marie-Françoise Plissard. That literally means the right of viewing or the right to view or to see. And this is very interesting because it creates a narrative in images without any text. Plissard Peters rejects here the traditional codes of the photonovels in the tradition of the New Wave filmmakers or the new novelists. The storyline is a love story, but in another universe women are not sexual objects that are conquered by men. They are free, self-confident women. The naked body is also presented as natural. The title gives another meaning to the whole story, which is a story about these two women, or more than two women, that are together or not together. It's not obvious at all what the story is about, but the images, they play with the point of view, who has the right to see, to view the other, who has the right to take a picture of the other. And photography itself is power, is the power of seeing, is the power of showing something. The narrative is closely resembling Mitchell's sequences, with their play with the mirrors and their looped stories that end with the same image on which it opens. So the layout of the photographs on the page brings these new photonovels closer to comic strips, as the size and the form of the panel also convey meaning. There's a lot of playfulness in the whole book and in the whole story. For example, how the frames are coming next to the other without any function that you can see on the left, or also with the story, how the characters, some of the characters that are androgyn figures, the man looks more like a woman and the woman is resembling to a man, and how they are teasing each other. The contrast between black and white really matters, as in one point of the story, these two girls that you see in the right are introduced. They are also strangely dressed with a masked face, and they are playing checkers. Checkers that's goal is to get down or eliminate the adversary's pieces, black and white pieces. So what's interesting that the French philosopher Jacques Derrida wrote an afterword for the book. That is the only text that appear in the book, and in his study he shows how this checkers game makes a whole sense of the story, or how you can read it through the checkers game. The storyline searches the limits of objectivity and fiction, but the reader can get lost entirely in the time and space of the narration.
From the 1970s, in a specific socialist context, conceptual works of art drawing from popular culture appeared in our country, which were characterized by the use of fine art photography. The works of arts that will be presented are approaching the genre from different artistic disciplines: moving image, photography, sculpture, painting, graphic art, literature, etc. These photonovels have drawn of comics formal features in different ways and for different purposes. What they have in common is the need for narrative. They combine text and image, and they tell stories in sequences. These photonovels turn up in a specific context as sequential photography were used by painters to explore the ontological status of photography. For example, Dora Maar in her photo sequences reduce and action into simple signs. On the image on the left, the movement of the ball is cut into the step where the ball is thrown up in the air. Then we see different phases where the ball is in the hand or in the air. After taking photographs of each sequences of the action, she is rendering the pictures according to mathematical algorithms to examine what different meaning does it create, just as Baldassari did at the same time in the States. Miklós Erdély, a well-known Hungarian conceptual artist and painter, who were a colleague of Maurer, used photo sequences to explore the philosophical meaning induced by repetition and reproduction. Just as Walter Benjamin in the work of art at the age of mechanical reproduction, Erdély shows that the reproduction of the same identical photo not only makes a huge change in the art's status with erasing its aura, but it is also ontologically a paradox. The photography historian Sándor Szilágyi and the art historian László Beke were the ones, among others, who studied the use of photosequence by the Hungarian neo-avant-garde artists. A linear sequence is either the representation of an event over time resembling a flowchart, or in the case of sequences arranged in a matrix, the representation of a change that occurs from frame to frame, as Szilágyi writes. According to Becker, there is a distinct visual rhythm that appears as an addition to the juxtaposed elements in the sequences of images when taken as a single visual wall. Both statements are true of László Haris's 6-5-90-75, a series of shots of a busy street in Budapest taken every 3 minutes over a 24-hour period. The idea for the series of 480 images was inspired by Andy Warhol's 1965 film entitled 8 Hours. The difference being that while Warhol presents the story of a single day, Haris condenses the 24 hours into a single view. The neo-avant-garde in Hungary has often been critical of the ruling political power, but they express their critique in a symbolic way, in a way that's meaning wouldn't be evident. The so-called Pécs workshop, Pécsi Műhely, was a group of artists who worked between 1970 and 1980 to renew the Hungarian constructivist and avant-garde traditions, to establish a new visual language and a new visual culture, often with the expression of social resistance as the most important element in their work. Kálmán Szijjártó's art gestures entitled photo sequences reflect on the social status of the artist, the social practice of art, and the validity of the developed artistic language. Throughout the series of photos visible on the slide, we see a cigarette burning with the words art written on it. Just like ashes, culture becomes vanished. It glows and disintegrates. The photo novels that were made in an artistic context are very different from popular photo comics in terms of their form and content, but their analysis can also reveal certain connections. It is also important to clarify the relationship of sequences and sequential photography to comics. At the very beginning of this presentation, we mentioned Scott McCloud's theorems, which classify the relationship of individual frames to each other in the context of comics and storytelling. Sequences or repetitions in photo sequences are similar to the moment-to-moment framing in comics, as an event can obviously be documented with the passage of time. The action-to-action framing described by McCloud in comics is also often used in photo sequences, but here the time elapsed can be longer and the focus is more on the action and its result. What is important to acknowledge is that photo novels use a formal language that is also characteristic of the movies. According to the principles of the montage, we can find alternating point of views between two sequences of movements. Two different angles of views, two locations, two moments in time. The series of photography by the photographer Peter Timmer, taken in 1977 and consisting of only 4 images, compresses time by presenting a complete but not concrete narrative story. No concrete action is represented, everything is left to our imagination. Ákos Birkás, a well-known painter in the 70s, had his own column in a journal called Fényképészeti Lapok, Photographic Papers, edited by András Bán and László Lugosi. This journal made up to only 3 issues, as it was a semi-samizdat journal, which means, for those who doesn't know it, that the authors were using typewriter and photocopy machine to edit their homemade journal spread between their friends and art colleagues. In the photocomic of Ákos Birkás, a group of friends get together at a house party, drinking, chatting, and photography takes over. Questions and doubts are raised. Text bubbles of voices flood the surface. There's a carelessness, a superficiality, lightness to the crafting of the photocomic, which is also carefully edited in a poor quality, amplified by the photocopying. The deliberately amateurish cropping, dangling figures, overexposed faces reinforce the ad hoc nature of the work. The text also suggests that the photographs serve as evidence because they reflect the spirit of the time, but a cigarette-smoking character immediately questions this statement. Proof? Nonsense. We are waiting for a sign, he says. And later another character adds, there is no sign, just a continuous surface. This photocomic marks how Ákos Birkás gets fed up with the medium of photography and conceptual art writing, and it anticipates his return to painting in the mind of 1980s. Several groups of artists use the form of photocomics independently from one of each other. One of these groups were the Bosch and Bosch group, a mainly Yugoslavian artist group, whose co-founder Slavko Matković created works explicitly to renew the form of comics. As Yugoslavia under Tito's regime was less controlled than Hungary, the artists in the Bosch and Bosch group had a big influence on Hungarian artists. Matković laid down the theoretical foundations of experimental comics in his 9-point program, New Comic Strips as a New Construction. Matković identified the comic as an apparatus for the disseminations of underground culture. At the same time, he goes against the modernist pop art use of comics. He is rejecting the popular stories and the practices of editing that characterize the visuality of mass culture. The novelty of his approach lies, among other things, in the fact that the new comic is not narrative, or at least it avoids the linear logic of narration, but rather is perceived and felt as whole. Although he used the technique of cut-off pieces combined with drawings. The Hungarian Árpád Fenyvesi Tóth was a friend of Matković who used the same cutout montage like comic strip to create his own oeuvre, but he went further within his experimentations. What was particular in his case that he lived isolated in Balatonfenyves, far from all artistic groups. He ran a paper shop, so he used expensively letterings in his montage called strips. His works, usually on A4 sheets, contain newspaper clippings, including photographs, diagrams combined with abstract signs, typography, text, drawn symbols. The frames typical in traditional comic strips also appear here, but they don't represent a specific line of truth. Not do the images describe a sequence of actions. The frame-by-frame strictly ordered panels give place to a chaotic disorder in his color cut-up pieces from 1986 entitled Comic 1 and Comic 2. Some fragments of texts are cut up from journals, but most of the texts are in white rectangular bubbles flooding the surface, the same ad hoc disorder like images. The texts aren't in close relation with the images, they don't come up from the mouths of any figures, although some of them refers to the situation in which the author finds himself and can be read as a critic of the regime. Oh dear, everyone's talking at the same time. Maybe he's waving his hand to me to step inside. Can we read in the middle of Comic 2? Or on the other panel, please forgive me, that's my personality. I like to talk a lot, but I can't do anything. For me neither. György Jovanovic, who's a sculptor, conceives a conceptual photo series in his 1976 intellectual artist's photo novel entitled Liza Viatruk Holographos. The photocomic, as the artist calls it on purpose, originally consists of an H-page text introduction and 60 gelatin silver photocopies, each accompanied by a caption. These elements are mounted on 12 pieces of cardboard and are currently on display on the wall of the Hungarian National Gallery. In 1999, so almost 20 years later, the artist published this series of images in a representative album, which started to appear more like a comic than the exhibited version. At first sight, the series of photographs appeared to be a playful study of form, with the outside and inside spaces inscribed in different abstract forms through the reflections of windows and mirrors. The text aligned under the photographs are usually a narration that gives sense to the series of images, and in some cases it functions as an interior monologue of the main character. The protagonist of the story is Liza Viatruk, a beautiful woman, in reality an inanimate plaster mask, who becomes aware of her own existence by seeing his reflection in a mirror, and then, at the peak of the story, she is blinded by light, falls into a trance, and realizes that she is pregnant. The plot of the story is very complicated, even though the settings remains the same throughout the whole book. The studio window and the garden behind it are the setting in which Jovanovic composes each scene. The narrative is organized along a complex temporal structure, yet linear, but at one point in time slows down when Liza looks out of the window and sees light which blinds her and puts her into a hypnotic state. She realizes that she is being watched, and in a flash a real future unfolds before her in the form of images manipulated by mirroring. This extended moment in the peak of the comic's plot. At the end of the story, after Liza learns that she is pregnant, all she can see is the garden and the construction work going on. From the 1970s, the composer and performer Tamás Cseh and the writer Géza Bereményi made music albums together in which they expressed the feeling of their generation under the socialist regime shadow side. János Vető, a key figure in the neo-avant-garde culture in Hungary, took photographs to illustrate their music albums entitled Antoine and Désiré and The Curfew of the White Dolls that were published in 1978 and 1979. In the early 2000s, Vető digitized his oeuvre and all his analog films and came to the conclusion with Bereményi that the images he had taken for the Tamás Cseh albums would from on its own write a story, a photo novel. Therefore they have published book in 2017 with the subtitle Photo Comic from the 1970s that was born from a reselection and rearrangement of the series of photographs taken once. On the back of Antoine and Désiré album cover originally featured a photo novel of 25 photographs by Vető. He used a blue duplex print inspired by Warhol's 1970 book adaptation of his erotic film Blue Movie. Despite the fact that it was originally created as a motion picture, the inspiration for the album cover was itself a photo book that was tinted blue due to a technical error, a detail that Vető wasn't aware of. Warhol is said to have had no understanding of the technique and wasn't particularly interested in it, and it was only at the premiere at the factory that he was confronted with the result, which is why he subsequently gave his film the title Blue Movie. In terms of storytelling, Vető didn't plan ahead. He went to the city with the authors Bereményi and Tamás Cseh and two good friends, the poet János Gémes and the artist Lóránt Méhes, and he took photographs. They went to press bars, they have met girls and people from the Secret Service, etc. Vető photographed the whole day, and later that evening the group went to Vető's apartment, where they developed the negative and decided on the basis of the contact sheets to compile a photocomic strip out of 25 photographs based on the date's events, for which Bereményi and Cseh wrote the caption that same day. When Vető digitized his oeuvre, the story of Antoine and Désiré was augmented with the images from the album The Curfew of the White Dolls, which features female figures, the Evas, and the mysterious stranger, the bridegroom, from the album's closing song, although we never see his face. The photo novel by János Géci, who is a writer, and the cameraman László Molnár, is a love story of a young couple in an ordinary family and their particular Sunday in Hungary at the turn of the 1970s and 1980s. The story takes place in Brezplém, a rural town in the Transdanubian region. The photo novel's photographs were completed in one day, and the story presents that one day with successive frames but using also cinematic narrative editing forms. The family wakes up, then follows their daily routines. They prepare for lunch, expecting a guest, Kata's boyfriend. Lunch is followed by a walk, and then the young people retire to a familiar apartment to be alone. That's pretty much the story. Originally consisting of 86 gelatin silver copies on cardboard, the work was created in 1980 specifically for exhibition purposes. It consists of photographs and photographed typewriter pages. The exhibition had no resonance and was not published until 1997, when a selection of 11 pages was published in János Géczis volume entitled Prozac. This publication is unique in that it contains several pages that were subsequently lost, as the negatives were stolen from László Molnár's apartment during a burglary, and the enlargements were damaged when a pipe leaked at János Géczis' house. In 2018, the surviving and damaged pages were finally scanned and partially digitally restored to be published in an impressive 105-page large-format book printed in limited quantity. The accidental deteriorations in the photographs are an integral part of this visual poetic documentary fiction, already recessed over time, whose topics include the passage of time. It is precisely the multiple layers of what is torn off, peeled off, and to be peeled off that is most striking about the photonovel. As already mentioned, at first, reading the book seems to be a sociographic, anthropological, documentary-style still life, which was realized in 24 hours and shows a day in the life of a middle-class family, from the time they wake up to the time to go to bed. However, János Géczis' text, arranged like picture poems, also suggests another reading, the story of last encounter before the defection. János Géczy and László Molnár's photonovel is a subversive example of a genre that has not really established itself in Hungary. In fact, the genre doesn't even have a consensual name, but this work that has become incomplete, ruined, rewritten and recessed over time, which presents a specific Eastern European life situation with forbidden and untold secrets spiced at the same time with light humor. It precedes by several years the photo novels written by Belgian authors Marie-François Plissard and Benoît Peters and published by the publishing house Minute, which are considered by international photo novel literature as the first literary and high art productions of this popular and despised genre. The photocomics we have examined, György Jovanovich's Liza, László Molnár János Géczis photonovel, and János Vető Géza Bereményi's photocomic, Ákos Birkási's photocomic, have in common that they are arranged from spontaneously developing sequences. They were created by disrupting, unfolding and restructuring the recording of the actual course of events that took place. The linearity of the story is questioned by the text, by the moment of recalling the memory, or even by the fantasy and vision of the future, which is mixed with the present of the narrative. The captured images are published in book form, retrospectively several years after the images were taken, recognizing the potential narrative inherent in the recording of the event. In addition to the carefully constructed fictional story, the sense of life that characterized the underground artists of the 1970s is also reflected in the images and symbolically filtered through them. The genre of photonovels or photocomics, despite of these artistic examples, couldn't reach the wide audience. Even in the art field, the genre remained recognized and well known only by few. Some artists continue to create works using this particular form, and perhaps it will capture your imagination. Thank you for your attention.